Oh, hi everyone. Welcome, welcome. For those of you who are just joining, we are just getting started. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Scarlett. I use she, her pronouns. I am tuning in here from Tongva and Quicheland, also known as Los Angeles. I am a programs and projects manager at Culture Hub here in LA. And I'm really honored and excited to host today's conversation on games, exclamation point, as part of Refest, which is Culture Hub's annual festival that brings together artists, technologists, and activists. Games is something that we have been really thinking about and working with a lot for many years throughout the past decade that Culture Hub has been around. And we're really excited and honored to have game makers, designers, thinkers, experimenters, explorers from New York, Chicago, LA, and Seoul here today. We'll get a chance to hear about everyone's practices, whether it is as independent game makers or as a collective, as a lab. And we'll have a chance to kind of discuss how they use game as a medium for transmedia storytelling, as well as a vehicle for social impact. So enough from me, and I'm excited to kind of get into introductions and get to know everyone and their approaches and what they're all about. So I would love to turn it over to Patrick and Ashlyn. Oh, before that, just letting a few more people into this room. Also letting everyone know that please feel free to use the chat to chat in questions throughout the today's event. We'll have a Q&A section at the end, so I will be keeping track of questions that you all chat in or comments, thoughts, and we'll get a chance to post them to the group at the end. So please feel free to leave questions. We also have a Korean translator in the chat I know that there's a lot of folks tuning in from Korea today, so there will be a Korean translation available. Great. So now turning it over to Patrick and Ashlyn.
Great. Thank you so much, Scarlett, for having us. I'm Patrick Jagoda. I work at the University of Chicago, and I'm part of the Weston Game Lab. And I'm here with Tizio from Hades and the Minecraft pig, and also a couple of Nintendo characters. But mostly, I'm here with Ashlyn Sparrow.
Hello, I am Ashlyn Sparrow. I also work closely with Patrick at the University of Chicago's Weston Game Lab. I am here in space because they're just IKEA shelves behind me. But we would love to talk to you a little bit about our lab and some of the games that we are currently working on.
Great. Do you want to start off, Ashlyn?
Yeah. So Patrick and I have been working really closely with each other for the past, 8, 10 years. I don't know, time's an illusion. But we've primarily been working together at the Game Changer Chicago Design Lab, working on social impact games, games for health, working with Black and Latinx students on the South Side of Chicago, primarily in the kind of board game, analog game space. We've also worked on these things called alternate reality games, which Patrick will tell you more about. But our new lab is the Weston Game Lab. It's opened up about 2 years ago, and this is a way for us to move out of the public health space and actually connect more broadly to other divisions on campus. So that allows us to connect with computer science, econ, physics, the other humanities division departments. And we really are trying to build community with other local game developers in Chicago, bringing them here on campus to work alongside of our students, develop their games, play test their games, etc. So we view ourselves as a community resource, a community hub, but also a space where new types of games can be developed, a space where new conversations can be had, having conversations around what does it mean to create games around climate change or social activism, racial justice, etc. If you want to keep going with the slides. Oh, yeah, I thought there was one more slide. But the main thing that we are working on in the lab are alternate reality games. This is kind of the space, our bread and butter, if you will. And Patrick, if you'd like to talk more about that.
Sure. So really briefly, not assuming that anybody knows this genre well, but it's been around for about 20 years now. And basically, these are games that move between the kind of physical world and the online world, right? So they tell single stories that move across multiple media, multiple platforms. And these games generally don't announce themselves explicitly as games, but so they ask the audience to sort of negotiate the status of the event that they're engaging in as they're solving puzzles, as they're creating characters, as they're discovering aspects of this world. And this goes back to games like The Beast and I Love Bees in the early 2000s, but there have been many kind of like serious or for social good versions of these games that have emerged since that time as well. And so we've been working on this genre of games alongside board games and video games since 2011. And so, for instance, Ashlyn and I worked on The Source and Seed, which were two games that were basically trying to onboard underrepresented youth into STEM areas, but doing it through large-scale realist and science fiction narratives, respectively. And there we were working primarily with Black and brown youth on the south side of Chicago who were in high school. So we were working with a younger demographic, and one that doesn't generally play alternate reality games, or at least didn't in 2013 and 2014 when we first developed this. So audience specificity was really important to us. And then more recently, we've joined a collective called the Forecast Lab, or formed a collective called the Forecast Lab that's included several other people, including Heidi Coleman, who's in theater and performance studies, Mark Downey, who's a filmmaker, Kristen Schilt, who's a sociologist, and Ben Kolak, who's also a documentary filmmaker. And we've created a series of games, both in physical space and online, using live streaming, using Twitch, coming from the Parasite, which was a game about diversity and dissensus that took the place of first-year orientation at the University of Chicago and included 1,800 students. Terrarium was a game that was focused on climate change, which we'll say a little bit more about. And then A Labyrinth and Echo were two games that we created during the COVID-19 pandemic as a way of connecting people in Chicago from a distance, and seen as something we're working on now that we can say more about later. Just to give you two really quick examples of this, Terrarium was a game that we made in 2019. So these are 4 characters that players would interact with. These were characters 30 years into the future who were struggling with different versions of climate change. And players basically entered an inverse escape room where they could speak to these people, or they could type to these people, and these people could speak back to them. And they had to go through a series of asymmetrical co-op mechanics in order to communicate through this kind of chasm. And they would enter these kinds of rooms where you would have text on the right side and various different interface features that kind of built up over time. And you would have to help someone get out of a room while learning what was going on in their future. We built sets for this, but much of it happened online through videos and through social media. And this game took place over about 5 months. The game ended up winning the kind of best live action game at Indiecade last year as well. And then Echo was our most recent project, which we did in very late 2020. And rather than talking about it, we want to show you like a minute-long video. This will be pretty quick to give you a sense of what this experience was like. So I'll play it now, and sound should be calibrated.
This is not a game.
Echo is an alternate reality game
to engage around the health pact.
Using a science fiction narrative to creatively approach COVID.
600 students, staff members, faculty members, even medical students sign up for the game.
I'm Scarlett. We don't have much time.
Echo culminated in a live online performance.
One 90-minute block of challenges and puzzles and storytelling.
We built a platform for running that performance. Live streaming video, chat, interactive puzzles. And all of those elements are sort of then suspended inside a seamless experience. Players went to a place and anything could happen.
We knew what was going to happen, but we didn't know what was going to happen. This is like a Christopher Nolan film that you had to try to catch up and piece together the parts.
Echo was fun. The quest got me and my teammates connected.
It was like a breath of fresh air for these 3 weeks.
I think we learned a lot about each other as well.
The challenges, the effort, bringing together just a lot of different groups was tremendous.
So this is a game, really briefly, we partially show this because Scarlett was one of our actors actually for this game and came out to Chicago in a kind of socially distanced way to perform in one of 3 rooms that we had: a puzzle room, a magic room, and a story room that ran simultaneously for this 90-minute block finale of a game that had been taking place over many weeks and was encountered by thousands of people early on, and then kind of hundreds of people in the weeks that followed. And this included players making their own kind of like COVID era assets and art pieces, speculative design pieces as part of the quests that were embedded within this larger alternate reality game. So that's some of our ARG practice, but Ashlyn will also give you one really quick case of a video game that we're working on together.
So we have been starting to think about this idea of what it means to create an encyclopedic game. This is coming from this idea of an encyclopedic novel where, you know, this narrative is supposed to try and bring the full range of like knowledge and beliefs of a certain culture, and really kind of identify all the different ideologies that have this idea come to make these things happen. And so, you know, examples of this are things like Moby Dick, Ulysses, Don Quixote. And so we're trying to figure out, what does it mean for us to create a game that takes all of the different ideologies, these political movements, these histories that have happened, and really start to project them into the future. And so we are playing around with a character, a woman named X, who you see on the left, and her kind of journey of learning the history of the US, thinking about colonization, thinking about transatlantic slave trade, the antebellum South, but also moving into what does it mean for the military industrial complex to, you know, infect all of society that we know. So this is like the beginnings of it. We're slowly developing a prototype for it. Hopefully we'll be able to put this on Mac, PC, and consoles very soon. But here you can see some of the concept art for the game that we're working on. So yeah.
Great. So we'll stop there. That is our Weston Game Lab at the University of Chicago, and we will pass it over to the UCLA folks.
Yes.
So Jenna, Eddo, and Tyler? Is that the group? Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you all.
Hi, I think I'm tasked with doing this introduction. Is that right, Tyler?
Sir.
What?
Go for it, Eddo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me share this screen. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about the Game Lab today. So this is the UCLA Game Lab's webpage. It is a lab that I started at UCLA 12 years ago, I think. What I can say about the lab mostly is I think it differs from a lot of other gaming labs I think really in institutions or almost anywhere, in that one of the primary values I think that we try to preserve is, it's going to sound very slippery, but it's really an idea of trying to keep games from being instrumentalized by any external utility. So what that means, for instance, now in the lab within a university like UCLA, there's a lot of pressure to make something like a game lab either technologically advanced so that it serves a tech industry interest, socially and politically involved in that games have to have a cultural use value or a polemic to them. There's a lot of pressure on institutions to produce those kinds of games. And those are the two main pressures that that I feel like it's very important for our lab to resist those and to try and preserve an organic experimental space for authorship that often produces those kinds of projects. There are a lot of polemical, social political projects. There are a lot of, let's say, technically innovative and experimental projects, but there are also very personal, poetic projects, idiosyncratic projects, low-tech projects, politically incorrect projects, I would say. There is a goal to try and, I suppose, open up the creative space around games in all aspects. So as far as media, attitude, process, we don't really teach proper pipelines or methodologies. We work collaboratively and individually. There are some projects that the lab has produced as an entity, but often these are organic, smaller or bigger projects, but that are less, that are very light on, I would say, management. So that looseness, I think, has served some aspects of game making and producing culture really well. I'd say there's an exuberance to the work that comes out of the lab. It's an unpredictability, a looseness. And I think what I'm especially proud of is mostly the prolificness and productivity, the idea that games are made all the time, and we're not beholden in a sense to certain outcomes. So I mean, I'm just showing, for instance, the games page on the Game Lab, and I invite anyone who's interested, because I'm going to give a pretty shallow pass during this time, because each one of these we could really go into. But if you look at just games.ucla.edu, you can really look at all these projects, and some of them you can play. But just to give kind of a quick, almost just a visual sampling, you can see, from animation, a lot of these this is using photos and cutouts, photogrammetry, a project about Corona times. This is a really wonderful.
This is a game that's being shown this year too.
Yeah, so this you can definitely check out. It's a wonderful project done by one person, by Zhang Feng, using photogrammetry, someone who's never made a game really until this project, and it's really incredible, done in 8 weeks or so. So, but if you keep looking, there's a lot of visual experiments. There's experiments in augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, polemical board games, mechanical games, like I said, transgressive games, and
Not
on and
safe
on.
for work
So,
games.
is what?
Not safe for work games.
Yeah, not safe for work games. There's a whole series of group polemical games that were made by undergrads at UCLA. This was sort of a game questioning kind of a history of sort of back to nature farmer utopias, and really looking at that history. It's a really great project to look at more in depth. But this is another example. This is part of a role-playing game period where we made pretty deep role-playing, tabletop role-playing games about non-genre topics, not the usual dragons and space. So this was a project about Jewish folklore from Eastern Europe, kind of a mix again of history and fantasy, but a very different take on labor and culture, and on and on. So I really think more than anything, it's worth just diving into the lab and seeing all the experiments. And I think in some ways that's, I think, one of our most valuable roles is to offer this sort of, almost like free space to try a lot of different things, and really go for it. So again, there's a lot of projects here. I encourage people to take a look. And yeah, it goes on and on. But let me jump to the top. The lab also produces software, open source software and tools that other artists and game makers can use. And we do a lot of guest talks, co-located shows, and maybe most ambitiously, we organize a big festival at the Hammer Museum every 2 years called the UCLA Game Art Festival. And if you want to dig into that, it's a sort of big curatorial project where we take games to the stage. So we really look to hybridize game practice with many other artistic disciplines or disciplines that don't exist yet: theater, performance, cinema, sculpture, poetry, writing, music. And we sub-curate kind of work from people in LA, students at UCLA, but also international artists, and try and do this work to, in some ways, bridge all these arts together and try and look at games through a lens that in some ways looks at all different art media as rich and diverse media that have a lot of different uses. So this is, in a way, the lab is showing how to do that within games primarily, whatever that means. And the show is really trying to, you know, it's on purpose that it's at the Hammer Museum, or we do things with LACMA or MoCA, and trying to kind of push that button a little bit. But it's not the main goal. I don't think games need a chip on their shoulder, so that's not really the issue. It's really to cross-fertilize, I think, all these different cultural approaches. And, you know, I think a lot of other experimental game artists are doing work like this, and I think it's really important, especially if the goal and the opportunity is to offer many, many alternatives to the industry, the game industry, you know, which has, you know, a much more narrow scope of what it can do, what it wants to do. So I think, if anything, the lab represents a pretty wild and experimental space. That's kind of the best way to put it. And yeah, so I think that's mostly what I wanted to show.
Thank you. Yeah, UCLA Game Lab has been a partner of Culture Hubs and Refest for the past 3 years, I think. There's some exciting projects in our gallery. Maybe Tyler, you can speak to those really quickly, because we work together intimately to curate those games as part of this year's festival.
Yeah, we have 3 digital games, and we have 2 tabletop or kind of theater of the mind games that are happening on the April 25th. But the 3 digital games are Little by Little by Little by Emily Tang, which is kind of slice of life. You're an anthropomorphic kind of, yeah, Eddo found it. Bunny, who's kind of dealing with kind of a declining mental health, and it really is, yeah, a game in which you're sort of kind of dealing with vulnerability and kind of anxiety and self-esteem, and drinking culture. And so that game's available for download. And then the other game we have is Fly, which is, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like a experimental chat room in some ways. Like Eddo might have maybe a slightly more take on it, but it's everybody can kind of log in and become one of these flies, and you have a very strict set of ways of communication with everybody else that's participating in the game. And there's kind of all these hidden nooks and crannies you can kind of fly in. And this is by Ivy Lovett, and she's like a really incredible illustrator. And so it's a kind of a very like lush world. And then the third digital game is Corona Time by Zhang Fang. And all these games were made during the pandemic. And so this game in particular was, I think, really out of this, a little bit out of loneliness, and kind of invited his friends to also 3D scan themselves and their apartments. And he 3D scanned himself and his apartments. And it's kind of a multiplayer game in which you can explore these spaces while still socially distancing. But the kind of aesthetic experience is pretty, just really fantastic, and kind of the 3D scanned quality is really great.
Yeah, there's some magical moments where you kind of pass through these abstract sort of glitched out photogrammetry walls, and you kind of cut through the earth to China and to other parts of the world. And I think those are really profound moments. And you end up, and then you change scale. So a lot of it in some ways is also looking at artists who are, I think, have been like cooped up in their studios and don't have places to show. And so this is like also an amazing moment of running around a friend of his studio in China and looking at all the paint and the materiality. So this is I think like a truly incredible use of photogrammetry to really convey a materiality that I don't think we're so used to with 3D modeling until photogrammetry really gives you this kind of grainy. So yeah, I mean, it's this game is just staggering to me, like that it was made in 8 weeks all by one person who didn't know how to program, didn't know how to 3D model, never made a game before, took one class and produced this thing. I don't know, and it's not like we're looking for this sort of individual whiz kid author. I think that's not like a value we necessarily care about, but sometimes it's just kind of cool to see what a painter is going to do with a medium, and that was just a completely incredible like surprise, and this is an amazing project, I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know we're still in introduction mode, but I was wondering, Ashlyn and Patrick, you all also have a game in this year's Refest. Do you want to tell us about Larry a little bit?
So the Leisure Suit Larry was less of a game that we produced ourselves, but mainly a part of a series called Twitch and Sniff is what we're calling it. So at the Weston Game Lab, again, we're always looking for like weird new experiences. And so we partnered with Jazz Brooks, who is a PhD student at UChicago, studying computer science, human-computer interaction, and is really interested in exploring other different sensory technologies, specifically with smell and taste, and how that can actually expand game experiences. And so we have been looking historically at games that have used smell. And we played through all of Leisure Suit Larry 7 to do this. Now, we did not grow up playing this game. This is our first time playing this game. And it was surprisingly not as like misogynistic as we thought it was going to be, actually. Like, we were kind of impressed. All the women in the game had a lot of power and agency, and it's interesting like how they managed to do that. But in terms of smell, it was really interesting about how they use smell to kind of help expand what the space is that you're in. You're on a cruise ship trying to figure out how you can go and, I guess, date or whatever the Captain Thigh Man is what they call her. And we were actually comparing this game in relationship to Leather Goddesses of Phobos, which was its inspiration, which also uses smell, but in a very different way, in a very text-based way. And so what are some of the different affordances of using text and smell and then having to actually scratch and sniff a card versus to being able to see your environment, then scratch and sniff a card. So that was what we were doing on the Twitch stream. It was a lot of fun. I believe all of the videos are still up there or playthroughs. So if you're interested in playing through the game with us. And I do believe we have a couple of scratch and sniff cards left if you're interested. So, email me if you want to scratch and sniff and play at the same time. It's a very weird and wonderful experience.
Thank you. We'll drop a link in the chat for folks to be able to view the archive videos. Yeah. Cool. Shall we maybe move to Ramsey and Kaho, who I got to know because they presented a piece called Selfie Deathmatch, which is a legendary experience that I wasn't personally therefore in person, but like definitely one of the favorite projects that Culture Hub did that everyone always talks about very fondly. So yeah, I'll give you the torch. Is that the saying? Hand over the virtual microphone.
Great, yeah. Thank you so much. It's great learning about other people's work. By the way, it's I love it. I just wanted to sort of introduce ourselves as two individual artists, and basically this is a collaboration between us. And each of us individually, we have work that we've done in like public space kind of games that are multiplayer games, and therefore when we cross paths, we sort of started collaborating. And so and Ramsey also does work with compilers and programming languages, and I do a lot of work in custom controllers and physical interactions, things like that. And so together we have worked on a few projects, as well as sort of taught a educational program, after school educational program for youth, and also for teachers, that is centered around basically soft circuits, and making games that are essentially costumes, that we call this program Playable Fashion. And at Culture Hub in 2017, we had the short residency there, and which was an amazing experience, where we got to use the black box as sort of a game space itself. And Ramsey can talk more detail about that project.
Oh, Ramsey, I think you are muted.
Sorry, I'm on Linux and it's always an adventure. But so yeah, Kaho and I have been collaborating for years, and the Selfie Deathmatch is, I mean, it's very nice to hear that you all still talk about it, because this is one of the favorite things that I have ever had a chance to work on. And yeah, as opposed to like the other, I think other people presenting a big wide body of work from labs, we're just going to sort of talk about this one thing that we did at Culture Hub. So Selfie Deathmatch is it's a 2-player competitive selfie taking game, I guess. We kind of never figured out the single sentence for it really well. But basically the way it works is you have 2 players are each given a selfie stick with a camera with a phone on the end of it, and they need to compete to take the best selfie within a time limit. And the person with the best selfies, their selfies actually get posted to this Twitter account that we set up for the game, which we'll look at in a little detail in a sec. But that's the basic mechanic, is you're trying to take the best selfie. and we were able to use the Black Box Theater at Culture Hub in Manhattan to create this sort of like game arena, and it was an opportunity for the two of us who have, like I said, we've done a lot of like festival games and like public space games, but I think this is the first time we had a chance to like program a lighting rig into the state machine of our game. So there were like lighting cues and like dramatic lighting transitions that were cued into the game. That became part of the sort of like, you know, the aesthetic experience. The progress of the game was sort of projected up on this gigantic wall where you could see the selfies that each of the competitors had taken. And then judges would basically judge the selfies and you know, pick which player had the better one on this like gigantic over-the-top emoji custom controller that Kaho built. So you know, as a game, it's like, you know, part like maybe equal parts spectacle and like mechanic, to like break it down, maybe more spectacle than mechanic. But we definitely like enjoyed the sort of like the storytelling aspect of it. Almost was like, I think the part that did the lift. There was like a fog machine and lights and stuff. So a good breakdown of like the way to think about the mechanic is you could sort of use your selfie stick to like interrupt other people's selfies, which is sort of our favorite tactic and a tactic that we try to encourage. So this was a selfie that you can see the other player trying to disrupt the taking of the selfie, but it's sort of being dodged in this matrix-like move. And if I recall correctly, and Kaho remind me or correct me if I'm wrong, but the best selfie was the selfie with like the most faces, and then it was kind of like subjective. So the players were sort of incentivized to like gather up members of the audience, right? So you just have this like big sort of like chaotic clusters of people sort of forming around the players as they would try to take selfies. And I love the photos that came out of it are so blurry and grainy, because you're using these, like some of them are just like that. You're just using these devices in ways that they're like not meant to be used, which is a bigger part of me and Kaho's practice is looking at consumer electronics and hardware as it exists and finding ways to misuse it playfully, I guess would be a way to sum it up. So yeah, these are some of our early test shots. That's me and Kaho. It's just beauty in motion. I think that's about everything I want to say about the game. Kaho, did I miss anything? Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really wish I could have been there. It's kind of a mythical experience that is always talked about, and I'm like, what is this amazing transformative experience that I missed? Cool. Now let's go to Daehong, who is a faculty member at Seoul Institute of the Arts, which is one of the co-founders of Culture Hub. Culture Hub was founded by La Mama Experimental Theater Club and Seoul Institute of the Arts, and Daehong is here repping one of our founders, Seoul Arts. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, but I'm not sure that I'm co-founder of Culture Hub, but yeah. Hang on, let me share my screens. Okay, yeah. Okay, do you see the screens?
We see one screen, which is
yes. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Daehong Kim. I teach game programming, game design, and VR, AR, and machine learning for media arts. I'm a faculty member of the Seoul Institute of the Arts in South Korea, but I'm also working as a serious game maker. Serious game is what the purpose of the game is not just for fun. For example, games for educations, healthcare, emergency management, or professional trainings. And while here, I'd like to share how I became a serious game maker and introduce some of my works. Yeah, I was audio engineer and amateur musicians, and at some point I wanted to improve my artistic skills more. So I went to the Seoul Institute of the Arts. Yes, I'm lucky enough to teach where I graduated. And I learned almost everything related to art making with computers from the school. And I realized that they are all related to games. Like all the elements was in the game already. So I decided to study more about the games. And so I went to the master degree. While I was studying the games, it seems like the most of game was like heavily dependent on visual elements like computer graphics. Since my background was the sound and audio, I decided to make audio only games. It was like more research based experimental games. The goal of the game was to demonstrate the audio can successfully be the primary elements of interactive entertainment. And through the users of 3D trackers, headphones, and game engines, I plan to create immersive experience that is unique and demonstrate both creative potentials and emotional power of the audio experience. At the end, I made two games. Like one is, the Jack and Beanstalk, the old tales. So like interactive storytelling, but audio only. And the other one is tracking the users, the hand gestures or the movement, so they can play guitar or drum. So they play the band together. I did public demonstration, and since everyone really liked it, and I was happy with it, and what I thought was the end of it. But the next day, my advisor professor came to me and said, like, why don't you go to the high school next door and show to your game? So I thought, oh, kids love games, so why not? So I brought my games to it. It's I made an audio only game, and I just made it because my background was an audio engineer, but I never thought that this game could be for the blind. Is oddly enoughly. So when I brought my games to the school, the teachers wanted to play first. They wanted to check what there's any harm to their students or not. And they played it for an hour and decided to show to students. And then the whole students came down and play my games for like 7 hours and 8 hours. It was a long line for it. And it was amazing. It was really an eye-opening moment for me. And the two students was really impressed me, that the one girl was meant to the chop the tree with the axis, and like voice instructed, like, chop the beanstalk with your axis, and then the girl was doing like this. So I was wondering, why she was doing this, and then the teacher was smile and came to the girl, and she guided her hand with like X motions, and I asked her why was she doing this? Was she like mocking around or something? And the teacher said, no, she was been blind since she was born, so she never saw that how to doing the X, the chop the tree, and that was obvious, but I never thought of it. Another school very impressed me is he couldn't move at all. He was like sitting on the chair. He couldn't move. But so the teacher was interactive, the sensors for him. And he was playing the storytelling. And then the teachers start to crying. And like I was asked to teachers, any something wrong? Like any harm to students? I was wrong. And the lady said like, no, thank you so much. And I was wonder why. And she explained that he cannot move at all, but only one, like right foot was only thing he can move. And she been taking care of the students for 2 years. And it was first time that he was moving his feet on the beat. Like there was like music, interactive music in the game. And he was tapping his feet on the beat. Here's a little video that for the sound only game that I made. So basically, the left upper corner is the computer screen. So how we see the sensors and the way that it is. Yeah, it was like 2007, like right 15 years ago technology. So like it's a little math, but it's experimental.
Try to catch me! You got me!
Well done.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. Who's been playing my harp for fun?
Oh, sorry. There was teachers testing my games. And that's the student who was like sitting on the chair, but it was left foot, sorry. And then there's the girl. Yeah, that's her moves. Well, it was really eye-opening and like life turning point for me. And I realized that game give people something more than just for fun. So since then, I've been looking for opportunity to create game like this. I went to Walt Disney and made games that teach young folks how to purify water and make electricity. I made games for White House Historical Associations. It was about interactive exploration of the Abraham Lincoln era. I've been making games for museums, bank, and hospitals. And recently, I made games for brain stroke patients. The rehabilitation treatment for the stroke patient is really painful. It accompanies, they cannot move basically, but they have to force to move like these simple movements like 500 times each. It is really painful. And well, I skipped this. One day, a company who invented this glove, it has a sensors. It detects the user's hands, gestures, and movements, and they contact me to make games with it. So I made like 48 games for them, and I converted this rehabilitation movements to like a game controls, like moving characters or drive cars or airplanes. So here's the games. Like I asked the patients, what do you want to do? Like when you go out to the hospital or when you get better. And they reply to me, oh, I want to make a dinner for my husband. I want to make a lunch for my grandsons. So I made like these cooking games. Some people said like, I want to go to Swiss and I want to see the Alps, the mountains. So I grabbed the Google Earth, the landscape, and I made the games. This little character from Korean traditional card games. So I use the characters what is familiar with the patients, and there's really young folks, the young kids for the who has the brain stroke. So I made this, kids related or friendly games for them. Yeah, so basically all the moves is really related to the rehabilitations treatment. That's the broadcast. Yeah, that's how they
재활글로브는 이미
play the
상용화되어
games
병원과
in the school.
재활치료센터에서 실제 재활치료에 활용되고 있다.
This is long, so I just cut it, and yeah, but luckily I got articulated. Yep, and basically that's what I've done and how I become the serious game makers. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. I feel like we could all listen to you all talk about your really interesting past and that's a whole other, I feel like it's a podcast waiting to be made. So something to think about. Yeah, now that we had a chance to kind of hear about everyone's practices, I'd like to open it up to kind of a more fluid conversation. There are some conversation topics that we wanted to kind of get to, but I think we can just launch in and see if any of the panelists have questions for each other and go off of there. I'm sure there are so many.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a question for you all. I really like what Eddo and all the folks from UCLA were saying about the benefits of working on experimental games rather than doing stuff that's instrumental and is in the service of really scattered, often corporate, but not always initiatives or kind of gamification as it's traditionally understood. And I was wondering, like, what all of you, not just the people from UCLA, certainly Daehong as well, given the kinds of games that you work on, how you all think about evaluating games. And I don't mean this, like, I have like real doubts about the ways that, say, surveys are used or focus groups are used in evaluating games conventionally. But I also understand that there's a value to not just saying, I made this thing and it works, and finding ways of thinking about how it operates in the world. Obviously, that's very different for like an art game or a very personal autobiographical experience or a poetic experience than it is for a game that's maybe not educational, but has connections to learning or raising certain kinds of conversations. But I wonder, are there more ambitious ways that we can think about evaluation or research relative to games that exceed the categories that universities usually give us?
Yeah, I feel like for art games, and this doesn't scale at all, but yeah, I feel really weird asking people to fill out a survey after they had an experience with art. It's like, what are we even doing? But while playtesting, it's or not even while playtesting, while watching someone interact with a game that I had made, I'll be like taking notes and like looking for moments of sort of like facial expressions or like body language, and it's like just looking. That to me is like the success or fail of the project. If the game is able to produce this like interesting like involuntary moments in like a person's experience, and like you can't scale that up. Like you need to be looking at a person with your eyeballs and taking notes. I think for a game that is more educational and or has a kind of therapeutic application, then you can like measuring outcomes sort of beyond the game sort of, I think, starts to make sense. And you know, do the people learn the thing? Do the people get better, right? If you try and build a therapeutic game, as opposed to observing the game itself, if that makes sense. Yeah, those are the things that come to mind.
I think at least for me, it's quite evident that a game that's interesting or inspiring to someone will inspire sustained play. Someone will spend a lot of time with a game, whether it's, you know, an artistic experimental game, or whether it's something that is more kind of level based or fun. You'll really know that someone is that it's communicating to someone if you actually want to sit and play with it, or spend some time with it. And I really do think that you know, it's hard to gauge whether a game is, you know, having some kind of is appealing to an audience, because you don't really make your work the way that you would make, I mean, if you're making art, you wouldn't make your artwork the way that you would make a AAA game, wondering, you know, who your audience is going to be. But instead, you know, games are very much about embodiment and interaction and play. And so the design of a game will start a dialogue. And you can see that happening, you know, the second that someone puts their hands on it and starts working with it, starts playing with it, that kind of interaction is meaningful. I don't know if it's as evident, you know, if that same person were to sit down and write about it afterwards, as it is, like you said, when you're actually watching someone interacting with the piece.
Thinking about impact, I'm reminded of a game that UCLA Game Lab presented, I think 2 years ago, the jalapeno game. What was it called, Tyler? Do you remember the title of it? I think it was called Jalapeno, where you're, as a player, ingesting, like the person who's ingesting the most amount of jalapeno infused water wins. So in terms of assessing impact, that was an interesting, very visceral, tangible kind of thing. But yeah, I'm curious to kind of to add on to Patrick's question, thinking about you all have such different collaboration models and processes, and how that figures in your collectives and your collaborations. How do you kind of think about impact, whether it's social impact, educational impact, interpersonal impact in your collaboration process? And also, what do you think is something that is specific to your collaboration process? I think in the process of kind of gathering you all for this conversation, something that came up a couple of times is, it seems like there's kind of different circles of traditions of game making, or like how game making happens in you know, LA is really different from Chicago, is really different from. So I'm curious about kind of is that true, or is that a myth? And what are some kind of specific things about your collaborations?
Well, I guess I can say something. I think I probably have a very strange relationship to collaboration. I feel like what I like in collaboration is some sort of preservation of centricity and like sticking. So I really like small collaborative teams, like maybe max 3. And for me, always important that every person has something they're bringing that is really, like, I don't know, autonomous almost, and then those things are thrown together at the end, and there's less conversation and compromise, I think, about what the thing should be. So I think an ideal model, which I've tried in my own projects a lot, is a kind of cycling model where you sort of commit to collaborating with 2 people or 1, and you say, okay, first project, here's the idea, and I want you to do this. And the next project, you do the same, like your idea, we'll do what you tell us, what you want from us. So less this kind of, here's a thing, let's come up with a project. So it's probably pretty problematic in some ways, this idea, but I think it tends to produce the kind of games that I like, which are maybe often about, I think, taking disparate talents or sensibilities and just kind of sticking them together and allowing them to play off each other. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And there is such idiosyncrasy to collaboration in different size groups. I mean, Ashlyn and I sometimes work with very large groups. I mean, when we make these alternate reality games, you know, there's easily like 30 people contributing to this, maybe even higher numbers if you think of people who are kind of like parachuting in to do very small, very specific things. But in our collaboration, like the two of us, which is right, like moves across all of these projects, and especially with this most recent video game that we're working on, it really is mostly the two of us. And I think like, I'd love to hear your take on this, Ash, but like my take is that we start by playing together a lot. Like there's like, you know, sometimes I see with my students that they may play a lot of games, but they don't have a sense of taste, like their own taste. I don't mean like good taste, like good aesthetics. I mean, they haven't played enough stuff or diverse enough stuff to know like what it is that they really want at a certain point. And so like in courses, that's a lot of the work that we do together as well. But like, I feel like we play a lot together. We figure out what we don't like, what we do like. And then like, there are these really amazing moments where we argue, but it's not like argument en route to compromise. Because I don't actually feel like we almost ever compromise when it's just the two of us. It's always like we argue through all of the possibilities and find the one where we're both just like, oh yeah, that's the one.
Yeah,
and it's not like it's in between. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. I think that's exactly right. It's not about like pick A or B, right? It's my idea or your idea. It's thinking through all the different possibilities. And because we're working together and talking it out together, and because we have this shared language that we built just by working with each other and playing with each other, that at the same time that we're arguing is the same time that we're also brainstorming at the same time, if that makes any sense. And then all of a sudden, like there's like a third or fourth or fifth possibility, and then that's the moment where it's like, oh, actually, why don't we just do that? And then we can take that and run with it. And that's kind of been our process. And even if we get further along in the process, right, something that we've done in the past might actually like need to change because of this new idea that we've created. And right. And so we're willing to even go back and make changes to things that we've already agreed to, just to make sure that the project works with what we're both thinking. So I think that's 100% correct, actors. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I had the pleasure of working with Ashlyn and Patrick on a recent game ARG that they shared, but also back in 2014, I think, or is it 13, 14, on a alternate reality game called The Project. And that was kind of my introduction into this world. And coming from an experimental theater, device theater background, I was just really struck by how much resonance there was in a collaborative between collaborative theater making. Like, you know, I'm like, you know, movement improvisation kind of person, you know, so I was kind of going into it without any expectations, but it was like, oh, actually it's a similar kind of thing of you just figure it out by moving, by doing. So I totally resonate with what you both were saying.
Yeah. I'm muted. No. There's a good question in the chat that I liked. Oops. About what makes an experimental game. Someone asked, but I think it's a good question. I think in some ways it's about trying. It's very simple. I think it's sort of about trying something new deliberately, doing something you're not good at, doing something you don't know how to do. So I think it's kind of a fine line between, you know, mastery and complete newness. So the idea that if you're already a master of something, how do you experiment if you keep doing that thing that you're so good at? But the question is like, can you become a master experimenter where you have a certain kind of fearlessness and willingness to obviously fail, but try something new on purpose. And for me personally, that's been like a really challenging process of always trying to go against the convention, like saying, I know this is how, like I play a lot of games, like I'm sure we all do, and it's like, I know this is how it works and this is how it's supposed to be. And like, I know that, I learned that lesson through literacy, but I don't want to do that. So I don't want a HUD at all. So there'll be a game with no HUD. Well, that's really doesn't work. So what do you, so, well, I just want to see, you know, or anything. So I think this idea of, it's a really tricky kind of learning and process where you kind of force yourself not to learn. So, yeah, but I think, you know, there's like jazz, experimental jazz is always a good example. Like there's a certain mastery of something there, but then a willingness to try things. And then, I don't know, does jazz then become overly kind of conformist as well? And is it really able to, I don't know, you know, those kinds of questions are really interesting to me. But I guess cycling from medium to medium, which I think, again, it seems like a lot of the folks here are doing, is part of that, like, energy. It provides that, like, excitement and experimental spirit.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way I think about my experimental practice is in the negative, because I have a non-experimental practice, which is, you know, Kaho and I like operate. We've been in and out of academia, I think, in our sort of our long lives, but you know, for the most part, that's not the context within which, you know, I operate. So I develop software for a living, and a lot of it is interactive software. So I'll do game dev as a freelancer, or like interactive work as a freelancer. I just did a big museum installation in Philadelphia actually just a week ago. Yeah, and in that space, like I will not put anything into production that I have not seen work like a dozen times before. And on those gigs, I'm the one saying like, nope, we're not doing that. Nope, that's not guaranteed to work. This thing needs to run until the museum runs out of money. Like, just completely unfun, uncool. And so my experimental art practice is the opposite of that. It's like, if I've seen it work before, I'm like not interested. And I want to, that's a sort of space to figure out what does and does not work that you could then maybe bring into more, you know, robust contexts. But yeah, I think, yeah, to Eddo's point, it's like taking what you know works and sort of just flipping it on its head just to watch it fail, if nothing else sometimes, and pushing through that.
I mean, I think of like experimental game making as oftentimes being on a spectrum with science, right? And it's not like, we oftentimes think of like the two cultures model in the university of like science versus the humanities and the arts. But in fact, you go back to like early experimental science in like the 17th century of like the Royal Society and Robert Boyle, and you read this stuff with these like scientists who are doing like early experiments and are lying in bed drinking wine at the same time and recording that like weird process by which they're doing these scientific experiments, which is so different from like early 21st century randomized control trials that like, you know, medical establishments do that are supposed to be like utterly systematic and controlled. And so like even the history of experimental science, let alone experimental art, is so diverse and weird that I think that there's much more of a convergence in game making, which is of course already on the intersection between like arts and science. And like experimentality for me and for Ashlyn is a really important term in just the ways that you all are expounding upon. You know, there's also like a risk here. I think my last book was titled Experimental Games, and I was thinking about the ways, in part, that the contemporary capitalist economy itself relies on experimentality to a really huge degree, right? And it's not randomized control trials. It's very uncontrolled experiments, like when there's product testing or things like that. Like they're really invested in this. I mean, you even look at like business writing on, and it's like filled with the language of failure and experimentation and stuff like that. So like, I love the term, but I also love the danger of being like close to like contemporary capitalism. Hopefully for me, like not wanting to go over the line too far, but being aware that this isn't like an outside necessarily, it's a process, it's a way of hypothesis testing, sometimes more or less systematically. It's a way of iterating, it's a way of like serially moving through an idea, sometimes exhausting it. Anyway.
I just wanted to say quickly, when you asked Patrick about evaluating, like how does one know whether a game is successful or good, I had a kind of, I don't know, kind of a smart ass answer a little bit, which was, I think kind of maybe flows well to this, which was, well, like that's a kind of, maybe that's a form of instrumentalization that is also worth questioning in a way. This idea that, you know, the game has, because the games are such a relational art whatever medium, right? As I think in some ways I do agree with Ramsey's like position about seeing the people in their eyes, and if you get that one person that really like gets your game, that's what you need, that's enough. But so the non-scaling is in a way an ultimate failure from a corporate perspective, but an ultimate failure, success maybe for an artist as well. There's that person that sort of is so I think that's kind of fun in a way, in that there's, again, the benefit of removing a kind of instrumentalizing metric, whether it's academic success, commercial success, artistic, critical success, does allow for experimenting if you completely remove this idea of evaluating it afterwards, because that would probably start to teach you lessons, and you don't want to learn those lessons.
Yeah, as we continue the conversation about collaboration and experimentality, there's an interesting question in the chat from Techie Becky. What are your thoughts on gamified civic duty type games?
Yeah, just to break it down, hello everybody.
Hello.
I was able to work with Culture Hub in 2013, I think, for one of the refests, and I worked with a collaborator, Josephine Dorado, and it was, our class was to use the city, to use the, I think, surrounding area, maybe 5-block radius as a map. And it was a geolocative type game where you would go around and do tasks based on where you were. And then everybody would come back to the headquarters, which was Culture Hub. So I'm trying to work on an idea with NYC Park street tree map, where basically like, any citizen can garden or care for a street tree. And so there's, I'm just looking at like using getting people to work together outdoors. Hopefully also I like games because they're, like you all have said before, it's a very complex animal. There's a lot going on in a game. There's a lot of factors. A lot of people could participate in many different types of ways. And it's kind of fun to work with composite projects that have a lot of different factors going on. I like big projects and big ideas, a lot of variables and parameters, a lot of mental stimulation. So that's one idea that I'm trying to work with now, and just doing, just creating some assets by actually caring for some street trees, plots. And the city has a map of that. And I'm sharing this because, maybe it's an awesome data set. It's an awesome board, like canvas for people to play with. And also it's a way, like my interest, I've always worked with a lot with students on the autism spectrum, but now I'm kind of more interested with people who are recovering from trauma after experiencing some personal trauma myself. But I always was kind of interested in art as therapy. And then using, an external creative goal that we can share together as a way to unify. I don't prefer that people unify or come together over trauma. I really wish we didn't have to do that. So I would rather us come together over a common creative goal. So that's one idea that I was trying to work with, but I don't know what other people's, and I was kind of forming it like a scavenger hunt, sort of grindier sort of grind away game, sort of like a farm, it's like an urban farm game, maybe SimCity type thing, but more of a sort of like a scavenger hunt sort of thing. But just turning ideas of civic duty into gamifying civic duty type of things. So you're basically tricking people to volunteer and help, but just, make it fun.
Thank you for sharing. Sounds like a really exciting project, and I hope I get to find out more about it. Yeah, what are some thoughts or responses?
Like how thinking about like volunteer work, how could volunteer, or just an idea, volunteering or civic duty be gamified? That's how it's going on. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, one way to do that kind of thing, I think, in creating a kind of social game is, like these games that we talked about early on, that we worked on, A Labyrinth and Echo in particular, were created during COVID, and parts of them were basically like, we try to get money by making a cell about something that seems a little bit more instrumental, and we do that thing, but then we spend most of our time doing the interesting experimental thing in the same alternate reality game project. And so for these COVID projects, we created a series of quests. So there were like 120 quests in one case, and there were like 80 in the other. And we created teams. There was a leaderboard, there were points. That part was less interesting to us, but it did motivate certain kinds of players. And then within that space, we tried to create really weird making quests where people would create videos or photographs or write short stories. But it could have been like engagement with the environment, right? It could have been civic duty engagement. It could have been, people doing things for their immediate community and scoring points as a team to do that. Like there are limits to that approach, but if people sign up for it and there's enough of a motivator, hopefully an intrinsic motivator, that could be one way of doing it, just using a kind of quest model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say that, to your point, Patrick, I think the sort of traditional like leaderboard points stuff is motivating to some, but that's certainly not universal. I've seen a lot of gamification efforts that are just like take an existing process and like assign points and it's like call it done. And that doesn't really, again, I think that'll work for some, but like not most. And if anything, I find that games are more effective. You can use games to trick people into doing good things, but I think games are more effective as a teaching tool to teach complex systems, because every game that sort of works has to teach you how to play itself, sort of definitionally. So if the mechanic and the sort of experience of the game as a system maps onto some other system in a meaningful way, you can get people to sort of learn how to play the game, and they like now understand this like other system. It wasn't civic duty, but Kaho and I designed a game to teach high school students how computers worked. It was called the Sponge Computer, and we designed a Turing complete, an actual formally correct computer that was, its screen was this like grid of sponges that you'd like flip from like yellow to green, and there was a set of instructions that like students would get to like execute, and they would compete, right? They would like try and beat the other team by like executing instructions faster, and then they would do things like predict which instructions were going to come next, so they can like go even faster than the other team. And do all these other things that are like real optimizations that real computing hardware actually does. So you had like high schoolers sort of independently deriving like the work of Intel engineers just by like competing. But that worked because the sort of the system of the game mapped very directly onto like how computers actually worked. And they came away from that game like with a visceral embodied understanding of that process. So if there's ways you could design the game that sort of just communicates like the sort of civic systems that are interesting to you, I think that could be actually very effective.
Thank you.
Another quick thought. So yeah, I think there this is the great thing about games, is that there are multiple ways to make a game about the same thing. So like you could use gamification, you could not use gamification, all this other good stuff. One strategy that we've also used at UChicago is to, when we want to make games to teach people about certain systems, we actually just go ahead and teach our students game design and have them create games for their peers to teach about the thing that they're most interested in, right? So then you can meet people where they are. You don't have to assume anything about the community. They are bringing their own thoughts and opinions to it. You can then be in the space of your own expertise, which might be an educator, civic leader, whatever. And then you end up having a conversation with people. Mm-hmm. And then those conversations lead to new ideas for you as educator or for students as game designers, which then again leads to really interesting game projects that their peers end up playing. We created this game called game academy called Chicago Health Academy. And one year we were trying to talk about drug use in communities, and one of our student groups was really interested in talking about marijuana usage in their communities on the south side of Chicago at the intersection of policing. And so this was also at the rise of like Black Lives Matter, and then we had marijuana. And so it was like a really like interesting conversation that I, as non-Chicagoan, but I, a person who happens to be Black, we could start having these conversations, but it's really up to them to figure out, what do you want in your community? I don't actually live where you're at. I have not grown up in this place. What do you want? What do you need? And they created their game. And then we actually connected them to other students. We actually also connected them to police officers, and police officers played their game. And it actually led to really interesting conversations. So that's another strategy that you could use.
Oh, thank you so much. Super interesting. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the really interesting responses. We only have about a little more than 5 minutes left. Time has flown by. Want to kind of ask two very open-ended questions. Feel free to answer both or one of them, or say something else. What does making and playing games mean in a post-pandemic world? And I'm sure, during the pandemic, I've had the chance to visit Chicago and be a part of the process there. And that was so interesting, kind of using some, innovative kind of decentralized way of working together. So I'm really curious about, what does it mean to make and play games? What does interactivity mean? What does play mean? And is there an upcoming project that you're excited about that you want to share about? So those are kind of my two offerings, prompts to everyone in the next few minutes.
Well, I will break the ice. I want to share my plan. Like, while I was making games for the brain stroke patients, that one of the hard thing was the conditions of patients is differ every day. So like, they can move this for 300 times yesterday, but they cannot do it today. So the problem with playing game is, it has levels, right? So they finished the level 3 yesterday. So they meant to play level 4 today, but the condition got worse. So they cannot play even like level 1. That means, we have to judge every data and everything. So it was really big challenge for me. And it took me a lot of time to how to solve it and make algorithm with. And I couldn't do it. But one day, the AI specialist, like machine learning specialist, came to me, and like we talk about it, and he developed a prototype of the algorithm, and it worked. So basically, the patients wear the gloves and do the movements for like 10 seconds, and then the machine detects how his condition is, okay, and what level is good for him. So it's immediately designed the level designed. So I got really inspired by it. So actually that leads me to go back to college. So I'm living like a week half as a professor, but half as a student. So I'm learning. I'm doing my PhD for machine learning. So it's really hard to come back to be students after 20 years of graduating. So before then, I was like harsh professor, like tell the students do study hard, but now I cannot because well, I just want to like share my experience. Thank you.
I can say this quickly. I think I've spoken a lot. I don't want to take up too much space, but Daehong, your work has been really inspirational because one of my upcoming projects is it's actually a physical therapy game for children. But the constraint is that it runs on low-end Android phones and in a web browser. So we could just basically send students a link, and you go there, and it's like a 3JS experience using the accelerometer to get them to move their bodies around and just get a minimum amount of physical activity during the day. So yeah, that's what's next on the horizon for me. So it was like really inspirational looking at your work.
Yeah, any last comments or thoughts as we wrap up? I'm sure, we'll, now that everyone knows who you are, that folks can follow your work. If you want to put anything in chat in terms of how to follow you, I know that some of you have already done that. Please feel free to do that. But any last thoughts?
Thank you. It was awesome to be able to share and listen.
Yeah, I think we're at the close of the day. Please feel free to check out some of the games from various artists in this room at the Refest page, which is culturehub.org/re-fest-2021. And yeah, stay tuned. Like I was saying, game making, game playing, interactivity agency play is such a important part of Culture Hub's work. We develop a lot of games or game-related projects, and we look forward to continuing to doing that and to engage our community that way. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Looking forward to more dialogues and more collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this.
Thanks for having us, Scarlett.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Scarlett and Aris, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.